At 76, Thomas had lived a full life. Married for 40 years, raised 2 children, and built a career that spanned over 5 decades. His home, once filled with laughter and the bustling of family life, was now eerily silent. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 2 years ago, and his children had moved far away, chasing their own dreams. The house, which had once been a place of warmth, now felt like a hollow echo of the past. It wasn't just the absence of voices that bothered him. It was the overwhelming silence that filled every corner of the house, especially in the evenings when he sat alone, sipping his tea. He had grown accustomed to the rhythm of a busy household, but now the stillness seemed deafening. For the first time in his life, Thomas was forced to confront the reality of his own solitude. He had always prided himself on his independence. Even after Margaret's passing, he refused to move into a retirement home or lean on others for help. But the loneliness was becoming harder to ignore. The once familiar faces of neighbors had faded into the background, and the phone calls from his children had grown fewer and farther between. Thomas began to wonder if he had made a mistake in isolating himself from the world, thinking he could handle it all on his own. Thomas had always believed that strength came from within. His father had taught him to be resilient, to face hardships head-on, and to never show weakness. But now, as he walked through his empty house, he found it hard to maintain that same sense of strength. The silence had crept into his bones, and despite his best efforts to stay busy with hobbies and household chores, he could feel the weight of isolation pressing down on him. His children, who had once been his pride and joy, were now living their own lives far away. Thomas felt guilty for not being more involved in their lives, and even more so for the distance that had grown between them. He had always been the quiet, strong father figure who didn't ask for help or show vulnerability. But now, in his later years, he realized that maybe he had pushed them away, believing he could handle everything on his own. He spent many nights staring at Margaret's old photograph on the mantel, wondering if she had ever felt the same way. She had always been the social one, the one who reached out to others and kept their family close-knit. Perhaps, Thomas thought, he could have learned something from her about keeping connections strong. One evening, as he was preparing dinner for one, he received a phone call from his daughter, Emily. They exchanged pleasantries, but Thomas could hear the distance in her voice. The conversation was short, and when they hung up, he felt a pang of loneliness. The guilt of his self-imposed isolation weighed heavily on him. Could he have done more to stay connected? He knew that the years were slipping by, and soon he would be left with nothing but memories. Thomas had always prided himself on being busy. He had worked hard all his life, first as a carpenter, then as a small business owner. Work had been his refuge, his identity. But now that he was retired, he found himself struggling to find purpose. The days seemed to blend together. Mornings were quiet, afternoons were long, and evenings were unbearable. He had tried to fill his days with small tasks, gardening, fixing things around the house, reading the newspapers, but none of it brought him the satisfaction it once had. Without Margaret's presence and the hustle of family life, everything felt trivial. Even the things he used to enjoy, like watching his favorite shows or going for long walks, had lost their appeal. The realization hit him one afternoon, sitting in his backyard, looking at the empty chairs where he and Margaret had once sat together. He had lived his life for others, his family, his work, his friends. But now, with those things gone, he was left wondering who he really was. What was his purpose now? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had never truly taken the time to explore his own desires and passions. He had spent so many years focused on providing for others that he had neglected to nurture his own interests. It was as if he had lived his life on autopilot, just going through the motions without truly asking himself what he wanted. It was a painful truth to face, but Thomas knew that he needed to change. He had to find a new purpose, something that would give his life meaning again. But where to start? He had no idea. The thought of starting over at his age was both overwhelming and daunting. But something inside him told him it was time. One morning, Thomas woke up with a new sense of determination. He knew he had to make a change, but he wasn't sure where to begin. He had always been good with his hands, so he decided to revisit his old love of woodworking. He had put his tools away years ago, when life had become busier and more demanding. But now, in the quiet of his home, he found comfort in the thought of creating something with his own hands once more. He dusted off his old toolbox and spent the next few weeks working on small projects around the house, fixing furniture, making repairs, and crafting simple pieces for his garden. With each stroke of the hammer and turn of the saw, he felt a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't experienced in years. Slowly, the weight of isolation began to lift. The act of creating brought him peace and a renewed sense of purpose. But it wasn't just the act of woodworking that brought Thomas back to life. It was the connections he began to make along the way. As he worked in his garage, he noticed his neighbors starting to take an interest in what he was doing. Some stopped by to chat. Others asked for help with small repairs. Thomas found himself enjoying these brief interactions, and for the first time in a long while, he felt connected to the world around him. It was these small moments that helped him rebuild his sense of purpose. He wasn't alone anymore. Not entirely. Slowly, his world began to feel a little less empty. As Thomas continued working on his projects, he began to realize something important. It wasn't just the act of creating things that filled him with purpose, but the connections he was rebuilding along the way. His neighbors, who had once been little more than distant acquaintances, began to reach out more frequently. What started as casual conversations about his woodworking projects gradually turned into something deeper. One afternoon, while he was sanding a new piece of furniture, Mrs. Reynolds, an elderly woman who lived across the street, came over to ask if he could help fix her broken gate. She had always been friendly, but they hadn't spoken much in recent years. Thomas agreed, happy to lend a hand. As he worked, they talked about everything from their childhoods to their favorite memories. Mrs. Reynolds, who had lost her husband several years ago, shared her own struggles with loneliness. Thomas listened, offering her the same kindness and understanding she had always given him in the past. This simple exchange sparked a new understanding in Thomas. For the first time, he realized that loneliness wasn't just something he had to face alone. Everyone around him, it seemed, was carrying their own burdens of isolation. By opening up and sharing their experiences, they could help each other heal. In the following weeks, Thomas began to spend more time talking with his neighbors. He started organizing small get-togethers, inviting people over for coffee or a simple meal. Though it took a bit of courage to step out of his comfort zone, he found that these gatherings brought him joy. It wasn't about the grand moments, but the quiet exchanges, the shared laughter, the understanding glances, the connection that flowed effortlessly when people simply allowed themselves to be vulnerable. Thomas realized that he had spent too much time trying to be self-sufficient, believing that asking for help or relying on others was a sign of weakness. But now he understood that asking for connection wasn't about dependency. It was about mutual support. Everyone, no matter their age, needed someone to lean on. As Thomas grew more comfortable with the idea of connecting with others, he noticed a shift in how he viewed his community. He had once seen himself as a solitary figure, isolated by his own doing. But now, he felt a part of something larger. It wasn't just about interacting with neighbors anymore, it was about the sense of belonging he had longed for. He found that small acts of kindness, like checking in on an elderly neighbor, helping someone with their groceries, or offering a friendly ear to listen, went a long way in building a supportive environment. As the weeks passed, Thomas's home, once quiet and lonely, became a place of warmth and connection. His neighbors began to look forward to his visits, and he found joy in returning that same energy to them. One evening, while attending a community dinner at the local senior center, Thomas was struck by a profound realization. He was surrounded by people who had been through similar experiences: loss, loneliness, and the challenges of aging. Yet, they had all found ways to adapt and continue living fulfilling lives. Some had taken up new hobbies, others had rediscovered old passions, and some simply enjoyed the comfort of shared experiences. Thomas was moved by the resilience of those around him. The simple act of gathering together, of supporting one another, had created a network of strength that he had never fully appreciated before. It made him realize that aging didn't have to mean retreating into isolation. It could mean finding new ways to engage, to give, and to receive. He felt a newfound sense of purpose. By contributing to his community and building meaningful connections, he wasn't just helping others, he was helping himself. He had rediscovered something that had been missing for so long: the ability to feel seen, valued, and connected. With each passing day, Thomas grew more comfortable with his new routine. He spent his mornings in the workshop, his afternoons helping his neighbors, and his evenings enjoying the company of friends. But despite the new sense of belonging he had found, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still holding him back. One quiet evening, as he sat alone in his living room, Thomas looked around the house that had once been shared with Margaret. The pictures on the walls, the furniture she had chosen, the little things that had once filled their life together. They were all still there. And yet, Margaret's presence felt like a distant memory. It had been 2 years since she passed away, but Thomas still held on to the grief. He hadn't truly allowed himself to let go of her memory, and in doing so, he had unintentionally kept himself tethered to the past. He realized that while honoring Margaret's memory was important, it was equally important to allow himself to move forward. It was time to release the guilt he had been carrying. Margaret had been a vital part of his life, but she would want him to continue living, to find happiness and fulfillment, even in her absence. Thomas knew that he couldn't change the past, but he could shape his future. Letting go of the sadness and guilt would free him to embrace new experiences and relationships. That night, Thomas decided to make peace with the past. He stood by the window and looked out into the garden, where he and Margaret had spent countless evenings together. He closed his eyes, whispered a quiet thank you for their time together, and promised himself that he would no longer be defined by loss. As the months passed, Thomas continued to thrive in his new life. The house, once filled with loneliness, was now a place of laughter, conversation, and community. He had rebuilt his relationships with neighbors, rekindled his passion for woodworking, and most importantly, he had learned to embrace the beauty of the present. Thomas had always been a man of routine, but now he found joy in spontaneity. He began traveling to places he had never been, taking day trips to nearby parks, and even volunteering at the local senior center. The world was much bigger than his home, and he was determined to experience it all. But it wasn't just about the external changes. Thomas had also found a deeper sense of peace within himself. He understood now that aging didn't mean losing the essence of who you were. It meant evolving, adapting, and finding new ways to experience life. It was about growth, not decline. As Thomas sat in his favorite chair, surrounded by the warmth of his community and the beauty of his surroundings, he realized that he had come full circle. The loneliness that once defined him had transformed into a quiet contentment. He had found the strength to move forward, to live fully, and to embrace the future with open arms. He smiled, knowing that life, even in its later years, was still full of possibilities. And that was a gift he would cherish, for as long as he had the strength to enjoy it. As we conclude Thomas's journey, we are reminded that dealing with loneliness in later life and embracing the inevitable changes of aging is all about rediscovering the strength within us. Aging, while often marked by solitude and loss, can also open the door to new beginnings and a deep sense of inner peace. Thomas's story shows us that it's never too late to start over, to learn, and to reconnect with others at any stage of life. Thomas's ability to let go of the burdens of loss and loneliness gave him the opportunity to live fully once again. His decision to reconnect with his community, to release the pain of the past, and to embrace the future with hope transformed his life. His journey teaches us that aging doesn't have to be about decline, but rather about growth, healing, and finding joy in the present. Like Thomas, each of us can find a way to navigate the challenges life presents. No matter our age, we don't have to let loneliness, loss, or aging define us. We can choose to face these obstacles with strength, build new connections, and find meaning in every new chapter. Thomas's story reminds us of the importance of cherishing every moment. The future is still full of possibilities, and it's up to us to embrace them, regardless of our age. Thank you for joining us in celebrating the resilience of the human spirit. May this story inspire you to take bold steps towards living a fulfilling and meaningful life, no matter where you are in your journey. Remember, life is always moving forward, and every new day is a chance for a fresh start.